Hello, 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 and welcome to the Cornfield. I am Jamie Beeman, and I am really excited about my guest today because we have been communicating with each other over a number of months as I have been educating myself in the ways of this crazy culture that we're in and getting more focused about the things I want to say and write about. And this person has been enormously helpful and a great guide through some of the shoals that I have been navigating in the current world and educating me, and hopefully will be very educational today. ZANDER KEIG, welcome to the Cornfield. I'm so honored to have you here.
Thank you, Jamie. It's an honor to be invited to be with you. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So, Xander, talk about the work that you do, because I know that you're a counselor. I know that you do wellness work. And I know that you've got such a varied background that you bring to the work that you do as a consultant and as a counselor. And I just give a brief overview for people who don't know the work that you do.
Absolutely. So, my background is in military and law enforcement primarily, but I did do a little bit of work in massage therapy and natural foods right before I went off to college. I went to college when I was in my 30s and studied interpersonal communication, and then went off and got a master's degree in conflict analysis and resolution, and then went to seminary and got a master's in theology, and then went off and got my master's in social work. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I worked for about 10 years in the federal service. I worked with the Department of Veterans Affairs, working with homeless veterans as a clinical case manager. And then I moved over to working with the U.S. Navy as also as a clinical case manager, starting out with substance abuse treatment program, and then moved into what became the Navy Medicine West transgender care team. That was starting in July of 2016. I was with them until January of 2019. That was during the Trump administration, when we had active duty personnel that were getting access to gender transitions with the command approval. So I was working with upwards of about 300 individuals in that period of time who were going through a gender transition medically and legally as well, and socially. As a licensed clinical social worker, I've spent very little time doing actual counseling in the way of psychotherapy, but I was a gender therapist for about 3 years in private practice. But I don't do clinical case management or gender therapy anymore. Since 2020, I've been working as a clinical consultant and as an emotional wellness or mental fitness facilitator, primarily in the corporate sector. So what that means is, as a clinical consultant, I'm often contacted by other clinicians who are working with trans clients, and they have questions. They're looking for resources, and so they meet with me, and I, help them out as best as I can. I also provide continuing education courses, and some of the programs that have the continuing education courses that I've recorded with them also provide certification for people to work with trans clients, broader speaking LGBT clients in some cases. And so I am a mentor for students who are going through the certification process. So that's another form of consulting that I do that's clinical. The emotional wellness and mental fitness work is primarily focused on conducting seminars or webinars on pretty important skills that a lot of us don't develop in our childhood, because perhaps we're not raised in an environment where there's a significance or an importance placed on these topics. So for some examples are how to regulate your emotions, how to tolerate distress, how to effectively communicate, how to avoid burnout, how to navigate uncertainty, how to get a good night's sleep, how to manage stress, how to mitigate conflict, right? Those are some examples of the more
I need all of
popular
these
webinars.
things.
I mean, don't we all, right? I mean, don't we
Yeah.
all, especially nowadays? So it's so that's primarily what I do. I have a lot of different volunteer projects that I'm engaged with. I'm in the process of writing 2 books as well. I'm also married for 21 years, so I have
Awesome.
family commitments. Thank you. Yeah,
And
so
you just
that's
had a birthday, so happy birthday.
thank
Just
you,
hot off a
thank you.
birthday. I'm older than
Yes,
you by just a few months, we discovered.
that's right. Barely.
Gosh, I feel like such a schlep. I'm just trying to make it as an actor, director, cabaretiste, and saucy essay writer. I don't know where I'm going, but so you come from so many different perspectives and so many different lanes of study, and if everything from the theological to the to real scientific. I mean, I don't know what approaches. I mean, the thing that got me through my big struggle with my mental health and just understanding myself was cognitive behavioral therapy, which I
Yeah.
did intensively for 3 years, and just being able to recognize the ways in which trauma in my life had impacted the way I think about myself, it wired myself
Yes.
in order to be able to navigate the world, and how you never entirely undo any of those things, but you start to learn how to recognize the pattern and to talk yourself away from it. So I know that those things are very, very valuable, and a lot of it is sifting through our ideas about things, our illusions about things, delusions about things, and reality. One of the things that I think it's kind of a big, huge, profound umbrella to talk from. But I think that a lot of what we're being asked to do nowadays, in terms of how we deal with identity in this culture, social culture, has to do with agreeing to go along with things that are purely ideas, concepts, theories, uh, 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 if I identify as it, you must respect my identification as it.
Mhm.
And we're on shaky ground, literally on standing on a volcano with the tectonic plates beneath our feet are shifting, and trying to stay grounded in reality. So, and a lot of this has to do with gender. A lot of this has to do with the trans movement and activism that I think takes many forms and is in itself diverse. But how do you breach this thing when you're dealing with people or you're advising people who are going to be counseling others who are coming from various different experiences and trying to navigate things like transitioning, especially young people? Where do you stand? Like, where
Mhm.
do you put your feet in reality so that you can then speak from your own experiences? Um,
Sure.
right? Where does
Well,
that's a lot, but where does that
yeah.
you ground yourself?
Well, I should state that the workshops that I do are grounded in cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm a CBT trained therapist, so that's where a lot of this comes from.
Yeah.
And you didn't use the clinical terms. Why would you? But in clinical terminology, I'd say that there's a lot of cognitive distortions that
Yeah.
that are masquerading as real. People are often personalizing things, so they feel as if somebody disagrees with them, they feel as if they're being harmed in some way because they're personalizing, and
Mhm.
personalization is a cognitive distortion, right? And there are specific tools and strategies to help people overcome personalization. There's also the catastrophization, right?
Yeah.
Catastrophizing, using terminology like, if somebody calls me the wrong pronouns, it's an indication that we truly are in a genocide, right? It's this escalation of language, and it's like, yes, it can be uncomfortable, right, for people to be recognized or referred to in a way that they don't want. And I think that, everybody's going to have a different reaction and different response. And I think those are two different things. Reactions are knee jerk and coming from an emotional place, and responding is giving ourselves an opportunity to take a breath, step back from something, look at it, figure out what's going on. Why does this matter to me? What's the history I have with this other person? Is it all said and done and the whole relationship is fractured now, or do I have to drop out of school or leave my job, right? So there's we
Yeah.
have to figure out how we're going to respond to things. But I think that we get into a place where if a person has experienced something and they're having a reaction that is exaggerated, oftentimes what'll happen is people will honor that. They'll say it's that how they're feeling is important, and how what somebody has done or not done or said or not said has impacted them. That the way the person is impacted is more important than the intention of the
Yeah.
person who did or didn't or say or do something. And it's like, unless somebody is being malicious, unless somebody is purposefully intending to cause harm, I don't think that we should be giving so much weight to impact over intent. And I
Mhm.
see that happening. And I see that happening within the clinical field as well, that there's been a shift. Just like in other fields, there's been a shift toward wanting to maybe honor the place that the client is in, and
Yeah. So
not do
it's
any
like,
exploration of the possibility that they're being
yeah.
histrionic, or they are dealing with some sort of cognitive distortion, that magical thinking, like everything should be exactly as I want it when I want it. And
Right.
as my father used to say, the world's not fair. you know
Well,
it's
and this is, yeah,
yeah.
and my question is, so then what is your purpose as a therapist if you're not going to challenge some of these things, if you're not going to provide a perspective and to try and lead the person to an ability to observe and to
Mm,
perceive the distortion that because I remember I'm a recovering, I tell people I'm a recovering perfectionist, and my thing was nothing was ever good enough, nothing I did. And I was a genius kid, and I grew up this, prodigy and all of these things. And everybody from the outside looking in, my God, Jamie, people, he's so arrogant. He thinks he's so amazing. He thinks, blah, blah, blah. And inside, I had this crippling, just just incredibly sadistic self-criticism and self like I mean, I couldn't come out of any social situation without going, "Oh, God, Jamie, you're so annoying. Just shut up." And,
yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
so I understand that. And I think it's exacerbated for young people today because it's all been incubated in this alternate reality sphere where not only do you get judged by sometimes thousands, maybe a million unknown people who are judging you and liking you, and this weird unknown quantity of people who are affirming your behavior with no responsibility to what happens to you.
yeah.
P.S. Um,
Love bombing, right?
yeah, and I think, and this is why I get upset in the trans thing with some of the people who are out there as activists who don't have skin in that game. They don't
Well,
have a trans child. They don't. They aren't.
yeah.
They're on the suburbs of it, and they're throwing money at it, and they're dressing their kids up and parading them at the Pride Parade, and doing drag queen story hour at their local reading library, and going, "Gas queen." Those people I find
Sure.
odious, and really really dangerous because they ultimately aren't going to be the ones who are going to have to deal with the reckoning that comes from choices that are made today out of I want to be cool and I want my kid to be cool and I
Yeah,
want
yeah.
that.
Well, so I think, as a within the clinical world, there are so many different theoretical orientations that govern how a clinician works with their client. And I'd say, it starts from the perspective of the clinician's worldview, right? Are they a modernist or a postmodernist, thinking person? And then from that, the theoretical orientations are somewhat, divvied up in that way. And then the intervention models that you would use with a client, that stems from that theoretical orientation, so that this idea of, you said to lead, right? To lead a client. So not all clinicians take their role as being a leader of the client. They might, it's like we have to figure out, in my opinion, we have to figure out, most of us, are we going to sit on the sidelines and just let the client be fully in charge of sorting it out while they're talking it through, right? They're just externally processing, and we're there for them to bounce ideas off of, right? There's some therapists that are very hands off, and then there are other therapists who are more hands on. They are more directive. They assign homework, and they want people to think about things in a particular way. I'd say I'm probably more in the middle of that. But again, I don't do psychotherapy anymore. And when I did do psychotherapy, it was specifically gender therapy, and I only worked with adults, and I only worked with transsexuals. I referred
Yes.
everybody else to other people because I didn't have the skills or the knowledge really to work with any other population, and so I kept my practice really small. But so like I didn't lead people toward how they should transition or how they should identify, nor did I just sort of sit back and let them lose direction, right? I was more
Yeah,
interested
because
in
you need
providing a place
feedback.
for them to
Yeah.
explore. Well, what does that mean to you? And in what, where are you getting information from? And who are you talking to? And for how long have you been thinking this way? And, where do you see this leading, in the next few months, next few years? Just getting them talking about things rather than leading them. Because I think leading can sometimes be a bit coercive, because if
Right,
we lead too much, it could cause some resentment on the part of the client who felt like we weren't
right.
there for them to discuss it. But so with this idea of the suburban players in the LGBT civil rights movement, it's interesting. I find it really interesting what is now being considered like the the issues that we're all supposed to be paying attention to or the most invested in.
Yeah.
For a time, it was being able to get married and keep a job and have a family and the sort of everyday things, and now it's gone into other things like you know sports and restrooms and story
Well,
hours. And the thing
here's
about drag queen
yeah,
story hour that I find really interesting is like I've been around a lot of drag queens. My mother used to put on drag queen shows. She was a producer of drag queen shows in San Diego back in the 80s. So I grew up around, not I didn't grow up with her, but whenever I was with her, I was around drag queens. And I can
yeah.
tell you that they're drag queens for the most part are adult oriented. It's adult humor, it's camp, right? It's campy humor, it's adult humor. So it's like to take a person who does adult based humor and put them into an environment with children, they have to be able to change how they talk.
Clean up
and
their act. Clean
and
up
I
their act.
think I think a lot of them are probably up to the task, but it's possible that some of them aren't, and those are the ones that have drawn the most attention. I think most are
Well,
probably quite up to the task for
and I'm
cleaning it
sure
up.
that's the case. I am sure that's the case. And I think
Yeah,
that this is one of the things that I come up against. I have friends in the LGBT community, good, close, like gay male friends of my generation who say to me, now, what's your problem with drag queen story hour? Because it seems really benign to me. I mean, you're just a drag queen with the kids and the book. I'm like, yeah, I know, but then there's this other thing. Just do a YouTube crawl. Just take a look at some of the twerking and the shenanigans and the dollar bills down the sweaty
yeah,
cleavage of the drag queen. Like,
no,
and the thing about it, and I wrote an essay about this is a straight person's idea of what gay culture is.
yeah,
Gay culture based on the Will and Grace episodes I used to watch, and my idea of queer as folk and whatever it is that I watched on HBO when I was in college. You know what I mean? My
yeah.
idea of gay is yes, queen, and bringing the drag queens without thinking. And the problem is, and the thing that I had to mourn a little bit and to come to grips with, and as a Gen Xer, you will appreciate this. We didn't have a gay kids culture because you
Mm-mm.
weren't allowed to be a gay kid. That wasn't a thing. So when you reached a certain age and you went through puberty and you started having your sexual feelings, and wherever and whenever you were willing to go there and start to experiment and to experience that, you were suddenly in a very adult culture, a very adult. And so
Yeah,
I feel like it's people who are culturally appropriating, for want of a better expression, something from an adult gay male culture and smushing it down onto children and going, look at me, aren't I progressive, giving my kid an early, orientation with gay culture and making it cool and making it, that's
Yeah.
premature. And then when you push back against that and you say, it's sexualizing it. Oh, they don't know. Oh, they don't know. Yeah, they do, because they're watching you. They're listening to the way you're reacting to it. They're looking at the way that you're trying to be, yes, queen, and carrying on, and they're imitating you. They don't really care about what's going on that stage. There might be one child who is a little gay boy like me going, oh, let me put that dress on. Please, you know what I mean? There's going to be one. But the other ones are looking at their parents and going, how do I make my parents like me here in this situation? And how do I
Well,
be part of that fun? And that's
yeah. Well, it's also interesting because you said it. It's gay male culture,
right.
right? Adult gay male culture. It's like I don't see equal efforts by these mostly straight parents to take their kids to experience any lesbian adult culture, right? Like, I'm not even sure what that would be. As a former lesbian, I'm trying to think. It's like, well, they could take him to the vegetarian potluck.
Well, drag kings are a thing now,
Well,
especially out in
sure, but
Brooklyn.
that's
It's a big
that's
deal now.
I know. When I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was in the Torrance Unified School District, which is a suburb of the county, and we didn't have what they now call the GSAs, Gay Straight Alliances, or there's different names for them now, Gender and
Right.
Sexuality Alliance. Well, but in the Los Angeles Unified School District, when I was in high school in the early 80s, they had something called Project 10. So there was, and they would bus us over. I went on a bus a couple of times to Fairfax High School in West Hollywood area to go to this Project 10 program.
10%.
It goes back to that. It harkens back to that 10% of the population is gay or lesbian, which of course is not correct. But it was a good round number.
I don't trust statistics anymore.
I think it came from Kinsey. It was like 10% of men are gay, but only like 7% of women were lesbian.
Don't let me forget to talk to you about Kinsey and about Mr. Dr. Money and where things like gender as a social construct actually come from. Because this is, you'll get into it. But
but it's like because it's like where we grew up, we're exposed to different things. And so, but again, I wasn't exposed to the adult gay culture until I got my fake ID and started going to Peanuts on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Hollywood. And then, of course, I was 16 years old and very adult. If I were in charge of myself then, I would have ripped myself out of there and had a good sit-down talk with myself, because I really did expose myself to some elements of adult, experience with drugs.
You were not ready for.
I was not ready for that. And I thought I was, because, we think that way sometimes when we're, I'm not a kid anymore. I basically got a fake ID. I snuck out of the house. I got in my car and I drove to a bar, a discotheque, that had drag shows.
Story. Yeah. Just to be in the culture. Yeah.
But it was very, very adult. And as a result, I was exposed to things that were, not in my best interest, and nothing that has scarred me. But it could have been a lot worse than it was.
Well, for me, I was ostracized as a child. I was like, might as well have been the only gay child on the planet. And from very young. And I left high school at 15 because I was having death threats and everything. And I was in, a suburb of Boston. It wasn't like I was, living in Red Hook, Brooklyn, in the 50s. It was very hard. And I was sexualized very young. And it actually did not even remember when I was sexualized at 11 by a family member. I was triggered by the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and Dr. Ford. And I actually had this whole just complete flashback of what happened to me at 11 years old, and called my mother and told her, and she was not surprised. It was her stepfather, my grandmother. But anyway, but I didn't remember that, but I did remember being picked up by men when I was 14 years old. And taken on a little joyride,
Yeah.
which for me at the time, and not to get into the details of it, but I was never asked to do anything. So for me, it was an adult of my tribe going, yes, you're not alone. And
Yeah.
here I'm going to show you something that feels really, really good, But of course, it all becomes very clandestine, becomes very dark and secretive and all of those things. So, and which brings us back to this conversation about what is gay culture for children. And in
Yeah.
my view, there's a difference between gender play. Like I went for the dresses in the dressing up box when I was a little boy. I wanted to be the princess in the center because I really wanted to be a star is what I wanted. And the star of every Disney animated movie I knew was Snow White or Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty. And she got to wear a pretty dress that glittered and sparkled. And that's who I wanted to be.
I did
So
not want to be that as a little girl.
and see, I don't know if you remember, I wrote a whole piece on Free to Be You and Me. And,
Yeah.
when the Ms. Foundation came along with Marlo Thomas and popularizing this idea of teaching
Yes.
kids, there isn't one way to be a boy, one way to be a girl. It's all right
That's
to
right.
cry. It's all right to play with dolls. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And
No,
thought,
I was raised on
"Come
that too. So,
Yeah, and my mother was as progressive as a girl who grew up in a sheltered, as the only daughter in a Jewish first-generation immigrant household in Brooklyn could possibly be growing up in the 50s. I
well,
mean, my mother,
my father was born in Mexico, but came to the United States, and he had a card in his wallet that he was a member of the what's the organization? The feminist organization, National Organization for Women. Now
oh yeah, yeah,
he
now, yeah.
had a membership card in his wallet. Yeah,
Yeah. My
yeah,
mother was on the board of the League of Women Voters, and she
yeah,
was like, she
yeah.
had just kicked my father out at 40, and she was an entrepreneur, and she brought us up on transactional analysis, and I'm okay, you're okay. And I mean, yes,
Yeah.
that, but there were no outlets. So when I look at young people now and I think about drag queen story, the other thing, and I know that it's a sad thing to have to bring up, but unfortunately, I feel nowadays it's one of the things that makes me feel like an older person in this community. It's talking about let's not give the people on the far right a reason to bring up an old trope about putting gay men around children is not safe.
No.
Why are you bringing something sexualized and adult into a space with children?
No, I get it because you're older, you have distinct memories of Anita Bryant, Save Our Children, Crusade,
Yeah,
and
yeah. And now they think
so
J.K. Rowling is Anita Bryant. I don't see that.
yeah,
I don't get it.
if you don't know about that history, people should look it up because it was it was a very it was damaging to our community as a whole. It was damaging to the individual lives of people. I don't know if anybody kept track, but I'm sure there were quite a few people who took their life as a result of that
No
crusade.
question.
And
No
the Save Our
question.
Children crusade, they were going around trying to make it so that gay people, lesbian people, but mostly gay men, couldn't be school teachers.
That's right.
It was a terrible,
And
terrible time.
it propped
Yeah.
up what was happening in the Catholic Church. It actually gave more cover for the pedophiles in working within the Catholic Church to go about business the way they were going about it because it was couched in religion, and it was
That's interesting because I've never heard anybody make that connection before. That's interesting.
To me, it's sort of like don't let gay men be around your children. These freakish things. Look at Father Donahue over here, upright,
Got it.
example to your. You know what I'm saying? It's like one of the things that we suffer from as humans, I think, but also particularly in America, is we worry about what something looks like more than what it is. We are more concerned with what something looks like in this culture. We live. There's a line from Oscar Wilde from Imports of Ignorance. We live, as I hope you know, in an age of surfaces. And the internet social media has made it even worse. It's not about how you feel about something. It's about saying the right thing and doing the right ritual and following the right people and not retweeting the wrong thing. People are really putting on a show.
Yeah, I hear that.
So what do you feel about kids and gender? Because I was having conversation about Charlize Theron's 3-year-old, looking up at her Apparently, Charlize Theron adopted two black kids. I forget from which nation. It was an Angelina moment. She adopted these two beautiful kids and she's raising them herself. And apparently, at 3 years old, her now daughter looked up at her and said, Mommy, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. And
Mm.
is now 7 and doing photo shoots for fashion magazines as a trans kid and is being paraded around as they're wont to do, these folks, as look how cool Charlize is, and her kid knew at 3. I don't remember being 3. I don't know that at 3, you can put enough of a sentence together that you would say it to your mom and it now becomes the thing, and now we're going to transition you. And maybe I'm just being an asshole. It's possible. But I think, well, if you've got Charlize Theron as a mother, you can really be anything you want.
Well, it's. I wonder if
I
the
don't know.
brains are different of kids these days because, you know, I'm sure when I was 3, I was just eating mud.
Yeah.
I don't really like what we're exposed to, because when I see tiny little kids now, that they're playing on iPads. You know what I mean? Like, so I
Yeah.
wonder if there's a way in which their brain is firing at a much younger age in a much more, you know,
But at
nuanced
that
way.
age,
That's,
isn't
I
it
mean,
the
I have no idea. I mean, I know that I hear from people, I hear from parents, right? I've heard from
yeah.
parents over the years that they say that my child said this or this, something akin to what Charlize Theron says that her 3-year-old daughter said. And it's like, did they say it exactly like that? Like, part of me is suspicious of it to a certain extent. Is it embellishment? Is it a rephrasing? Is it putting words to a sentiment that was being expressed? Like, I'm not really sure, because I don't know how a 3-year-old knows how to even articulate something so complex.
As
but
gender.
but they say they do, and people in my field, right? So people that work in gender medicine or transgender health, they're convinced that these little teeny tiny little children, and it's, I mean, I don't know enough about neurology and to know how the brain works at that young of an age, but it does seem like a very complex social reality that
Yeah.
it I pause when I hear people say that a very young
I just think
child made
3.
such an
I think 3.
articulate statement.
And that it had so much truth that there was this
I
frisson of authenticity that Charlize felt, that
Sure.
of course, like to
Well, but you're
me,
supposed to. That's part of that social pressure
well,
you're
this,
talking about.
okay,
Like,
yeah,
you have to,
you have to
um
affirm.
the ideas you have to affirm, but I don't know that there's one definition of what affirmation means, right? And so to
Well, and
affirm.
here's what you were getting at before. I worry about it in the medical profession. I worry about what's happening in
Mm,
Canada, and I'm not deeply knowledgeable about this stuff in the way that someone like you would be. I'm trying to stay up on what's happening, but the Canadian situation, where if a kid comes in without a parent, underage, says, I'm trans, I want to start hormones, you got to start them on hormones. You're not allowed to say no. There's a whole thing. Am I wrong about that?
well, I do know that there's, even within the United States, there are certain states that have specific laws around different kinds of medical or behavioral health treatments. So at a certain age, you can go and seek, you know, mental health counseling without a parent's permission. You can go and get an abortion without parents' permission, right? Things like that. And so it's probably, there's probably then going to be people who just take it into that next category of providing treatments to children. I mean, it's as a social worker, one of the things that I'm the most concerned about is the depth at which we truly understand our clients. In social work field, we do something called a biopsychosocial assessment, which is very comprehensive, and we ask a lot of questions in a lot of different areas of the individual's life. and to get a bigger picture, like a more holistic view of, where they've come from and what they've been through and what's going on now and what are their hopes and dreams for the future and what kinds of support systems do they have in place. And I don't know that if a person goes in and just makes a self-declaration based on a self-identification, I don't know how in depth those assessments are being done, and I don't know to what degree. I don't know the time frame. If a young person without parental, escort or parental, agreement can just walk in and say who they are and in a short period of time get access to medical treatment, the concern I have is that they don't really know the patient or client well enough. And then also, there's the issue of, you have to sign informed consent forms when you go to see any kind of medical provider or behavioral health provider. And informed consent forms are written in a crossover of two different kinds of languages, legal and medical. These are very sophisticated languages. Most people are fairly illiterate when it comes to scientific literature and legal literature. So to be able to read a document that is riddled with terminology that comes from the legal and the medical fields, how most adults cannot understand what it is they're reading. And so, and not all providers or clinicians do their due diligence in providing the necessary information, so then somebody is knowingly consenting to something. So I don't know how you get a 12 or 13-year-old to understand the information that's being provided to them verbally and in written form, and how that they have the capacity, right? The cognitive capacity to truly consent to what they're about to embark on. Can a young person fully understand and consent to lifelong infertility, for example? Because that's what happens if you go on puberty blockers and then in adolescence, right? Say you're 10, 11 years old going on blockers, and then you go on cross-sex hormones when you hit an adolescent age that would be, normal for going through a puberty. You go through puberty, but not your natal puberty. You go through a puberty from exogenous hormones. So your body never actually goes through a natal puberty process. So you're infertile for your entire life.
And you don't develop sexual response either, do you? I mean,
well, I've heard people say that. I think I've heard Dr. Marcy Bowers say that. She's a gynecologist. She's the president of WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. She's also a trans woman, and she does vaginoplasty surgeries. And typically that's where you invert the penile tissue into a vaginal canal. And the issue is, in particular, that she's raised concerns about is that if you put a natal boy or a biological male onto puberty blockers and then you put them on cross-sex hormones a couple of years later, their penis never grows. So they don't have enough tissue to create a vaginal canal. And now for some people who have no interest whatsoever in penetrative vaginal sex, but I don't know how you know that when you're 16, 17 years old. But now adult trans women get what's called they don't make a long vaginal canal because they say they don't want that, and there are fewer complications with it. But if you think, no, I want a longer vaginal canal, I want to have penetrative sex with some sort of prosthetic or somebody who has a penis, but you don't have the penile tissue for the inversion vaginoplasty, they've got to get that tissue from somewhere else.
But they had harvested from people's arms,
that's on the trans guy side. For them, for trans women, they generally tend to use colon tissue.
Wow.
And because colon tissue has what's called mucosal lining. It's that wet lining similar to the vaginal canal. Whereas if you invert the penis, it doesn't self-lubricate.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I appreciate the frank clinical language that you're using about these things, because I think if people dance around this stuff, to me, look, I am heavily tattooed. As a Jew, I can't be put in consecrated ground. My lead character of my series pilot that you were very kind enough to read, he said, his sister sees him after 20 years and he's all tattooed and they're Jewish. And she's like, you can't be buried in consecrated ground. And he says, that's all right. I'm planning to spontaneously combust, but I worked in the beauty industry in New York for 15 years. I've seen every permutation of plastic surgery and fillers and Botox and nose jobs and jaw jobs. And I've seen it all. There's nothing I ain't seen. And frankly, I find it hypocritical for anybody to criticize anybody, other adult who's going into something as knowingly as they possibly can, altering their body in whatever way they freaking want to do. This is the culture that we live in, and in some parts of that culture, in some certain strata of that culture, it is a status symbol to have lips out to you. Like it means you can afford it. It means you can afford it. So Look, all of these things, body modification has been part of the human experience since the dawn of man. So I don't have any issues with any of that. What I have an issue with is like when I got my ear pierced my freshman year of college while living with my mother at 17 or 18 years old, it was a big deal. And I didn't get tattooed for the first time, even though I wanted to desperately long before that, until I was 35 years old. And even then, it took me like 3 months to decide to actually go through with it. And now, of course, I'm addicted to it. But children, this is the thing. When you say, puberty blockers, they're reversible. It's just a pause. We're just delaying puberty for a little while until they're sure. Because if they don't do it, and this is the part of it that, Xander, this is what I'm leading to. Because I've met young pop singers of note, because I used to work in high-end retail in New York in the 90s. And I've waited on young ingenue girls, teen singer, pop superstars who come in with their mother and are 15 and are still sore from getting their breast implants. I've seen this. Okay, so my thing about it is, these are parents who want to make sure that if their kid is a male to female transsexual person, that they get it before the Adam's apple and before the voice drops and before all of that, so they can pass. They're concerned about having a believable girl. And they don't care about the ramifications of what it means to put kid on puberty blockers. They'd rather do that than have them reach 13 or 14 and suddenly develop male characteristics. And it doesn't seem to be in the other direction, although I see a lot of young women who maybe otherwise might identify as lesbian, who really just want to take their breasts off and they want the scars. They don't want the nipples. Okay, so that's a different, whole other thing. But this first thing, because really that is a different thing.
Yeah.
But this whole thing of parents feeling like puberty blockers are reversible, I don't know. I doubt that.
So there's a couple of things about that. With what's called the Dutch protocol. So in Holland, they were the ones who first started using puberty blockers on gender distressed children, right? So children who were being brought in by their parents, right? It's a completely different story than what's happening here in the United States now. These were young children. They were being brought in by their family. They had family support. They were being provided psychosocial support. And the idea came up, if we could pause puberty, then they wouldn't develop these secondary sex characteristics. You're exactly right about that, because if they continued on, or clinically they would say maybe persisted, right? If they continued on with this cross-sex identification, or took their gender nonconformity to the very edge of that, and they wanted to go and actually do a transition, that then they wouldn't have all these secondary sex characteristics that they'd have to take care of with surgeries or electrolysis or laser hair removal. So that was actually one of the factors that was influencing that protocol of putting them on the blockers. Now, this thing with Blockers didn't come into use with gender distressed kids in the United States. I think until 2007, but it was over in Holland before that. And now it's all over the world. Not every country. But the thing with puberty blockers is that so when you go on puberty blockers, it causes they say it pauses puberty. What it does is it just stops certain hormones in your body from either producing or distributing. I don't know the exact. I'm not an endocrinologist, but it stops your body from developing any secondary sex characteristics. And so no breast budding, no Adam's apple formation, no deepening of the voice, right? None of those things that would start to happen in puberty. Now, if you gave a kid puberty blockers for precocious puberty, that's what they were used for primarily, because
Kids
sometimes
who started too early. Kids who started earlier.
Yeah, very early, like 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. That's too young to go into puberty. So they pause the puberty, and then when they hit maybe like 10, 11 years old, then they took them off and they went through their natal puberty. And so the research about
was it amplified? Was their puberty normalized in that time? Like after having put it off, did they go through a normal puberty?
Yeah. They went through a normal puberty. But here's where it differs for the cohort now, right? These are not precocious puberty children. These are children or young adolescents, like maybe 11, 12, 13 years old, that are presenting to clinics with or without family support here in the US and in Canada. And they're being placed on puberty blockers. And one of them is called Lupron, and it has a black box warning from the FDA on it. It has some interesting, contraindications for that medication. But here's the thing. It's like, the latest research that I've seen shows that about 90% of kids who go on puberty blockers continue on to then go off the blockers and go on cross-sex hormones or gender-affirming hormones or hormone replacement therapy, right? People refer to it in different ways. I'm a medical social worker, so I talk in very medical terms, and we refer to it as cross-sex hormones. And so if you go from puberty blockers and then you switch right into cross-sex hormones, what ends up happening is you go through a pseudo puberty, right? You go through a puberty that's brought on by the exogenous hormones that you are putting into your body, either through a topical application or an intramuscular or subcutaneous injection or an inserted pellet under your skin that releases slowly over time, or pills that people take. So I've even heard of sublingual in some places where you put it under the tongue. But anyway, it's like, it's created in a lab, right? So your body's not producing it, so it's different than your natal hormones.
So it's a foreign body that you're putting into your
basically system. But I mean, yes, as you can see, and everybody can see, like, I'm female sexed. I spent the first 39 years of my life, which is 40 years on the planet, living as a female, a woman, albeit very masculine one, but as a woman. I started taking testosterone 18 years ago, and so now I sound how I sound, and I got this big, Grizzly Adams beard, and the hair left my head and went to my chin, is what I say to people, and also my chest and my arms and my legs. It's like, this is what testosterone does. So it's not to say that it doesn't do anything. I went through a second puberty. Right, I had my first puberty I started when I was 11, right, menstruating. I went through that very young, and then I went through it again in my late 30s. And so I can tell you that I've heard directly from somebody who went through a natal male puberty, and then they transitioned to live as a woman, young woman, like late teens, early 20s, and they were taking estradiol or estrogens for a period of time, and then they decided to cease from that, and they had what is referred to as bottom surgery or vaginoplasty or genital reconstruction, right? I refer to it as genital reconstruction because that's very medical. That's just how
Yeah.
we talk
Well,
about it.
that's what it is.
And
That's what it is. I
so
mean,
so then they had to take testosterone injections, and they said that having gone through their own puberty naturally, that there's such a difference between how they feel now with this exogenous, you know, hormone that's
yeah.
suspended in oil that's being injected into their body. Right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's it's
Yeah.
it's not at all like the way they felt when they had their natural levels of
Well,
testosterone in their
it's
body.
interesting. It's interesting that these are all things that I just think people need to be as informed as they can be. Whether you're a
Yeah,
parent of a child, whether you're a child, or whether you're an
that's right.
educator, with the child of the child,
Be
just
informed.
educate. As Auntie Mame said to Mr. Babcock, knowledge is power. And
Hmm.
I believe this to be the case, especially where it's like I've never had cosmetic surgery, okay? But I dated a bodybuilder. After my long-term relationship broke up, I fell in love again with a guy who was a bodybuilder, semi-professional bodybuilder, had been doing steroids his whole freaking adult life, who
Mm.
dealt in them. And I wanted to know what it was like because I'm dating this person
Yeah.
and I want to see whatever. And I'm also a gay man and I wanted to see what it would do to my body. And it does freaking work.
Yes.
Okay. And I was doing testosterone, whatever. And I did it for about 3 months. And it works. My body was ripped, and it didn't take a whole lot of effort. But I did also become extremely angry and volatile and broke
Sure.
many things and realized why the man that I was in love with was a emotional roller coaster, like beyond anything that you could ever rein in. God bless him. May he be well. I don't know where he is now, but so having had like a little drive by of the world of injecting yourself with hormones, and I've done plenty of drugs in my life too. I was a club kid in the 80s. I mean, do the math. But so I know when something doesn't feel right
Sure.
or
The
doesn't
difference
feel
would be
natural.
that
How does
you
the
have
child know?
Yeah, you have your natural testosterone, and then you put on top of that. So, it tends to be when hormones are out of balance that our moods are also out of balance, right? And so for
Yeah.
somebody like me, the amount of testosterone I'm putting into my body is I have oversight from an endocrinologist. Every 6 months I give blood and I have a sit down with them because they want to make sure it stays within a range. I don't have aggression and outbursts of anger, and so for me but it's like if I did feel that way, I would know then that it was out of balance, either too low or too high, right? It's
Right.
one or the other. And so it's it's important to consider that because I think some people, especially in the community that I'm part of, where you're putting exogenous testosterone into your body, I think they accept that aggression and violence and anger is just a natural byproduct of testosterone, and it isn't. It's a natural
Yeah.
byproduct of imbalanced hormones,
Yes.
and
Testosterone with a testosterone chaser.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like
It's like,
that's
yeah.
gonna.
Hat on a
So people
hat.
so people who skip shots, right? People who so if you're not like, I have my calendar set every like 9 days, I do it. If I wait one more day, I can feel the difference, right? It's like,
Yeah.
and when I give blood, I have to give blood at the same time of day, the same day of the week, or the same cycle date, so that the lab work is consistent, or else they're looking at all these inconsistencies. Those lab numbers will make no sense if one time I go in the day after I give myself a shot, the next time I go in the day before I give myself a shot. Those numbers are not going to reflect the accuracy of what's in my body. And so
So,
that's the
so,
kind of
so
thing that a lot of people that are transitioning and doing a medical transition, they're not being very well followed by the
right.
practitioners. And a lot of times, because I've had this, I went a couple of years without seeing a provider because I was in a different state, in a different system. And they were like, yeah, we just base it on how you feel. If you feel okay, then everything's okay. And I thought to myself, well, all right. They're the doctor and they've been doing this for a while. But now in the system where I'm at now, it's like every 6 months. And I've grown to appreciate how attentive and how involved my endocrinologist is. because I ask
Yeah.
questions and he gives me answers, and he's a nice young man. And so it's, he's learning
But see,
too. I think
I
he's like
think
an attending, doctor.
this is something that I'm glad that we're touching on this and that you're sharing your personal experience of this, because to me, it's not just affirming, loving your kid and affirming that your kid is the person that they want to be so that they grow up happy and well adjusted, and you're going to try to like restructure the world to bubble wrap them properly so that they go out into the world and everything is going to be glorious for them in their new age form of being a human on the planet. All of those things, my heart goes out.
Yeah.
But this is the boring stuff about the impact of medicalizing yourself for the rest of your freaking life, that it has to be presented as a project. It takes, not everybody has the management skills that you have, Xander. Not everybody has that kind of discipline. Not everybody is in a mental space or in a space, like a lot of these young kids are being over medicalized with like antidepressants and Adderall and things to sleep and things, blah, 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 things that I didn't have any knowledge or access. I mean, we talk about recreational drugs and me smoking pot the first time when I was 15 years old in line to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show in Harvard Square as an underage kid. That's nothing compared to the high-level pharmaceutical cocktails some of these children are going to school every day packing. And my thing with it is you have to bore them with it. They need to be made to look at surgeries, films of it. They need to know how this is going to impact them the rest of their lives, and they have to take their medication this way, and they have to do this much, and they have to go in for this, and they have to get blood work. This means you have to have health insurance.
Yeah.
Well, all of these things need to be laid out,
Yeah.
not as a way to be what they call, which I find really revolting. And I see this being leveled at people like Buck Angel and Blair White, who, Blair White, I just think she's hot shit. I just think she's hot shit, and she doesn't care, whatever. But anybody who's walked that walk and gone down any road where they've been medicalized and had multiple surgeries, had things done to their body, had to go through the pain and recovery, those are the people you need to be listening to, and not accusing of being gatekeepers and transphobes, because they can pass. There's that whole other caste system amongst the trans people of people who can pass, and you don't have any skin in the game of going into the wrong gendered restroom because nobody's going to question whether you're a woman, Blair White, or whether you're a man, Buck Angel. To me, that's a whole pecking order, mean girls thing of we're not going to take you seriously because you have the money so that you can look fish. I mean, to me, that's like what we used to do in the drag world, because I was a female impersonator for a decade.
Yeah.
And, there was a pecking order of who looks more beautiful, and if you were transitioning, like I remember Candace Kane getting a lot of shade thrown at her back when she was part of the drag scene, and she started to transition. She's a beautiful woman. She's a beautiful woman.
Absolutely.
She's beautiful. She's beautiful now. Beautiful woman, beautiful person. But she got shade when she started hormones and got her breasts. So there's those pressures, but honestly, I think that these medical things are real. I think when I see kids just going, gender is a social construct, I'm like, do you know who came up with this phrase? Do you know who Dr. John Money was? And when you mention Dr. John Money, it's like mentioning Joseph Mengele. It's like, oh, that's like Godwin's law. It's like, oh, you're bringing up the ultimate. He came up with that idea.
Yeah.
He came up with that whole idea, and he was advocating for pedophilia, and he did gender surgeries in the 60s on children. And this is the guy. It's like most people who consider themselves to be, social justice warriors, they've never read Foucault. They've never read Derrida. They don't know what they're talking about and where this comes from, and it comes from sick shit.
I've been saying that for quite a while now, that people are espousing postmodernist rhetoric, but they don't know the individuals behind where the rhetoric comes from. And so it's like, if you're gonna do it, if you're gonna be a queer theorist, then you should at least know where queer theory comes from and what it means. And if you want to embrace it wholeheartedly, then do it, but at least be informed. I mean, part of the issue, part of the issue with, because I was a medical social worker for so long, the attentiveness, nurses are similar in this way, especially nurse case managers, is that when you're working with patients who have a chronic illness or some sort of condition where they need to take medication on a regular basis, they need to undergo certain therapies on a regular basis, like physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech therapy, right? It's like keeping people on a schedule so that they're doing, if you have a medication and it says on the bottle, take every 12 hours, they have determined that that is the life of it lasts for a certain period of time. And if you don't take it every 12 hours, you're setting yourself up for a relapse of whatever the issue is, like say a blood thinner, right? You
So
take
there's
it,
like a cascade of reactions,
right?
and your
And so you
body
have
is
to,
no longer. Yeah.
right? And keeping your hormone levels balanced is important because it's important to keep your moods balanced and to keep a lot of things, and then that has a social impact. If you're dysregulated in your mood, you're probably causing a lot of grief in your workplace, in your social life, in your relationship at home, and how you're parenting. So it's like, but keeping track of that, adults have a difficult time keeping track of when to take their medications. How are
It's
children going to do it? Well, it's going to have to be their parents, and so
and that's a
you're
project, right?
if
And
if
and,
well,
and
here's the
that's
thing,
something Charlize
Jamie.
Theron can afford.
No, but here's
That
the thing:
project.
if a child can get access to medical treatments without parental consent, then how is the parent? The parent is supposed to be regulating, right? It's like I'm sure there are significant limits on what kind of actual treatments are being given to young children without parental consent. I don't know. I honestly don't know if like a 12-year-old would be prescribed puberty blockers without any parent knowing anything about it. My hope is if that's happening, oh, for God's sake, because um, the it's like, is that a daily medication they have to take, or is it an injection they get on a weekly basis or a monthly basis? And are they going to
Yeah,
remember to go into the clinic to get their injections on the right time? And
I've heard
who's
stories
following up with them? So it's like
of
I'm a
kids.
little uncertain how all that works. So
Well, I'm
I'm
uncertain
hoping it doesn't
too.
happen at all, but I could be wrong.
Well, I've seen interviews and I've heard stories of kids, teenagers being handed hormones and syringes and given a link to a YouTube video of how to inject
Oh,
themselves.
yeah. I
I've
mean,
seen it.
that's
I don't know.
I mean, if the problem with that is that the problem with being given injection needles and a medicine and a video to watch, if this is something that's happening, um, it still doesn't guarantee that that needle isn't going to hit a nerve, which is a very painful thing. There's no guarantee that there's not going to be a lack of hygiene, which then could end up being an abscess or another kind of infection in the leg or the muscle, or the muscle that they're injecting into. So I sure hope that those stories are the
Yeah.
ones where the parents are actually involved, and that parent is either doing the injection or supervising it. Listen, the first year that I was on testosterone, I went to an injection clinic and had it injected into me by a nurse. And then eventually I decided I didn't want to keep doing this, and I had them teach me how to do it.
It's not
And
easy,
so I had
and
to
it's
do it in their
very.
company for a couple of times, and then
Yeah.
I've been doing it on my own now for like what, 16 and a half years.
So how do we not be reactionary in the few
Yeah,
minutes that we have left together?
yeah,
There's so much that can be said, and I worry about children. Okay, I
okay.
didn't have an easy time coming up as a kid. I
Well,
didn't.
let me
But I'd
tell you
rather have
something.
had that than have what these kids are up
Yeah,
against now, where you're getting so much attention and so much love for saying that you're they them, or saying that you're the opposite, another
yeah,
gender, and
yeah,
and how do you allow kids to just discover it and not affirm them into a corner
yeah.
that turns into this kind of medical project for life? How
Well,
do you do that?
I've met a lot of parents who are very loving and kind parents who fully embrace their gender nonconforming kids and let them wear whatever clothes they want to wear and style their hair any way they want to, and get involved in whatever kind of activities they want to get involved in. But they've been very clear, right? They've set boundaries, which is the duty of the parent to set
Yeah,
boundaries with the kids and say, listen, let's get you in to see, a counselor where you can sort of talk through some of the questions you have, some of the concerns you have, some of the confusions you might have, some of the, you know, whatever it is. Let's get you talking to somebody who's going to let you just do that. And when you turn 18, you can take charge of your own health. But for right now, as a parent, I'm in charge of your health, and I want your body to grow naturally. I want your bones to grow naturally, and your brain, and your emotions, and all of that to grow naturally. What I would say to parents is, on quote, both sides of the issue. I know there's more than two sides, but let's just frame it that way for this one purpose. So for parents who are thinking, one, there's really no such thing as trans, or this is some sort of evil thing, or I should push back and resist my child. I'm sure you'll learn the lesson very soon that pushing back and resisting your children's wishes is going to be very difficult, pointless in some cases. So it's like, see if you can find a way to, if you're a religious parent, to have a little bit of grace in this, right, in this relationship with your child, and just be curious about what they're saying, like, like, oh, sweetie, what does that mean? Or, help me understand. Like, do it in a way that's very gentle, right? These are children, right? We know how to talk to children. The other thing is, instead of being reactionary against statements like, right, they'll hear statements coming from the more activist side of the community that will say things like, well, all of the, or most of the major medical associations in the United States support gender affirming care for youth. And it's like, well, that's actually true. The American Medical Association, and American Academy of Pediatricians, and the American Psychological Association, and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, and the Endocrine Society, they do all support that. These are professional associations made up of practitioners, providers, clinicians, therapists. These are not consumer protection organizations.
no.
Their liability and their protection is oriented towards their members, which are the professionals in the field. So just keep that in mind. And
And there's
then,
also the pharmaceutical
well,
pressure.
well, yeah, but let me,
Yeah,
as a way to entertain the conversation with somebody who's using that, right, who's making an error in their reasoning and making an argument towards authority, right? That's a logical fallacy, right? So it's like, but if they want to play the game of appealing to an authority, then what you can say is, well, I've also, and I'd say, do your due diligence, parents, which is go and look at the reports coming out of the governmental medical boards, right, of Britain, France, um, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. It's either not yet or soon will be translated into English. It's still, I think they're still working on it. So these are governing boards of medical providers who have the sole job of looking at the consumers, the patients, and being protectionist towards them. And they've looked at all of the studies in their respective countries and in the other countries, and they've come to very different conclusions about starting children on blockers or putting teenagers on cross-sex hormones. And they're instead starting to pump the brakes a little bit and say we need to get family support, psychosocial support, psychotherapeutic support, peer support, and we need to sort of do the watchful waiting, which is something that a lot of people on the more activist side are not happy with. But that's a very standard medical response, is watchful waiting. That's not just with gender stuff. That's a traditional response that medicine has, watchful waiting. So it's like, do your due diligence and read those reports. So then you can say, like, well, you're citing professional associations. And I've been looking at these reports that are coming out of, medical governing boards for the countries. And, typically in the United States, especially in the more activist side of the people, the citizens in our country, they like to hold up Europe and Scandinavia as being the epitome of goodness and the way they do their government. And they're mischaracterized as socialist governments. They're not socialist governments, but they get characterized that way, and so they're put up on this pedestal. And so now we have Sweden and Finland and Norway, and all of a sudden it's like, well, are they wrong on this then? Have they not done their due diligence? Are they not the most loving, peaceful, welcoming nations? And now they've gone totally wrong, on this issue. At least I think it gets people to start reevaluating. And maybe
I think it's also an old idea of Scandinavian countries being where you went for a sex change. This old Christine Jorgensen, story.
Sure.
To me, people are drawing on the most antiquated, like creaky old things. And if you say to them, look, it doesn't take a lot. All you have to do is put into Google who came up with the phrase "gender is a social construct." It will take you straight to Wikipedia and Dr. Money.
Yeah.
It will take you straight there.
Yeah.
It's not that deep to inform yourself of the sources of information, as you
That's
said.
right.
I don't know how many people. I don't know how many people have the bandwidth to do that.
I think that's part of the issue, is that our lives. I mean, we're bombarded now with digital media, right? And so we're streaming and we're playing video games, or I mean, I don't play video games, but it's like we are being bombarded with information. I remember when going to something like Ask Jeeves, was this smaller little internet search engine that it didn't have every answer in the world. But with Google, my concern is that if you put a search term, or a lot of people don't know how to use search. They never went through the class that taught them how to do the reference library catalog. Look, so it's like they don't know how to do that. The what do they call that? Oh shoot, I'm not going to say it right.
I'm not going to know it.
Yeah, well, it's like if you want to look something up, you have to know exactly what you want to look up. If you just put transgender into a search engine, you have to put things in quotation marks, and you have to put, so a lot of times I think people get so many results when they're looking something up. It's hard to know how to filter them. What's current? What's reliable? What is applicable to me? In the research, what's been validated. People don't know the answers to those questions, so I think they look sideways. They look at their peers. They look they watch YouTube videos of people that are their age or their type of trans person, so to speak.
And we get hooked on narratives. We get hooked on, I'm going to watch this reality series about this trans teenager and see how their parents dealt with it and see how they said this and they said that.
It's easier than sifting through Google search results.
Well, I just can't imagine consigning your child to a lifetime of scheduled doses of medication and all kinds of physical obstacles and things to overcome and to experience in life without doing your homework. I mean, to me, that's
that future projection that you just laid out. I don't know that is, if that's being considered fully.
I don't think it is.
It's hard because it's like, well, when I started taking hormones, I didn't do it for myself, but I was 39 years old. I have to, if I screwed it up, then it's on me, right?
And by then you knew what you were doing, in as much as you're responsible.
Well, but I was severely I had a lot of knowledge gaps when I went into it myself.
How could you not?
It's like, but for me, it was the right thing to do. I'm perfectly happy. I don't, it all of it, a lot of it has to do with temperament too. When I say to people, like, I've had surgeries, I'm okay, I'm living my life, they're like, well, you must have not had any complications. I'm like, oh no, I had complications, but my default setting, I'm just more calm. um I think
It's
before we
also
started
it's
recording, I said
also
I've
way
never been anxious. Like, I don't get anxious, and so
you're
um
obviously not Jewish. Couldn't possibly be Jewish. If you've never experienced anxiety. Listen,
yeah.
I want to wrap this up because I could
Okay.
keep you here all day.
Yes.
How do people? Because you and I came together. Part of what motivates us right now is as older people in the LGBT community, to whatever extent we consider ourselves part of a community.
Yeah.
What can we do? And how can we inform ourselves and organize ourselves around just being a voice of reason, just trying to maintain good mental, emotional, sexual health for gay and lesbian youth, as well as kids who are exploring what their gender identity might be? How do we be involved with that without having to go head to head with this screeching activism that to me has
Yeah.
very little to do with life on the ground for
Sure.
young people coming up?
Well, I'm not on social media, and I'd say get off social media, right?
Smart.
That'd be the first thing. I'm not on the Twitter or Instagram or, I don't know, Chitty Chat, whatever that people are doing. I don't know.
TikTok. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
TikTok. Yeah. I mean, like, I'm not on any of that stuff. And so I'd say that's a good place, is to either get off it or filter it or take sabbaticals from it, because I think
Yes.
that is leading a lot of people to not feeling very well emotionally and mentally. I think the research is there, right? It's doing harm, especially to young people. And then the other thing is to just reach out. It's there's going to be reactionary people on, quote, both sides. We're going to have very reactionary people on the left and very reactionary people on the right. I'd say that about 85% of the adult population is not reactionary in those extreme ways. So just find other people.
In the
With
middle.
Right,
In
find
the
people
middle.
who are moderates, centrists, center left, center right. There's different ways of independence, classical liberal, libertarians. There's a lot of different ways that people, talk about this. And then there are groups of people that are coming together and trying to get a message out there. One of them that is there's a kind of, I don't know, a journalistic website called Substack, right? You have a Substack, so if people are looking
Yep.
at your Substack, they know they can look up other Substacks. And I would point to the LGBT Courage Coalition. This is a group of people across the United States and Canada that are coming together to talk about some of the concerns that they have as gay men, lesbian women, bisexual people, and trans people who want to just sort of steer the conversation a little bit more towards the middle. And for people who don't know, this happened in the 90s. With the gay and lesbian community, there were the more fringe elements of that community. And I've got to
Yeah.
admit, I was on the fringe. I was a lesbian avenger and a Queer Nation
Yeah.
leader. So I was in that fringe in the 90s. And so the more moderate gays and lesbians sought to rescue the community from us more radical types who were, denouncing everything and asking for the destruction and destabilization of everything. And they said, listen, we want to get married and we want to have a family and we want to own homes and we want to have a job. We want to serve in the military. We want to be able to adopt kids. And so they took the community more towards the center. And then lo and
Yeah.
behold, we got all those things that they wanted. And so I think there's other efforts of trans people who are trying to do something similar to that, so that within our own community, we can sort of say, listen, you're going so far over the ledge that it's going to be very difficult to persuade people to come on board with you, right? Where are some compromises, some concessions that we can make to go forward, because we got all of the things we said we wanted. Even the Affordable Care Act gave us
Yeah.
access as trans people to our health care.
That's
And
right.
there was no more pre-existing conditions to say we couldn't, get health care. And so we couldn't be denied health care because we were trans. But then
Yep.
things started going in a much different direction around self-identification and pronouns and access to single-sex spaces. And that's really now ticking off,
Dominating.
the
Yeah.
other side. And so now we're in this sort of whirlwind, socially and politically, with all these state legislatures proposing these bills, and some of them are passing, but most of them that are passing are getting thrown out in the courts. And I think they're just sort of throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks.
Well, and I think it's happening on all sides. And
Yes.
what I appreciate, Xander, and I'm sure you'll agree with me as we wrap this up, I have a
Yeah.
theory. It's a theory about our generation. We talked about this before we started recording, about being the lost generation, the latchkey kids. What did you call us? The Pepsi generation?
Pepsi generation. It's
Pepsi
like the
generation.
older Gen X and the younger boomers. We're like this little
Yeah, yeah.
strange
But
generation.
I think you may agree with me. I don't know what it was like for you but for me coming of age as a gay man and deciding to be out in the 80s in show business.
Yeah.
Not an easy path. And then becoming a drag performer on top of it all was like,
It surprises me. I thought everybody knew there were queens in the theaters. I don't get it.
There were, but a lot of them. Well, it's changed to a great degree, thank goodness. But back in the day, a lot of the homophobia and shade being thrown my way was by gay men.
Oh gosh.
who were lusting after the straight guys that they cast and put in tight pants.
Straight acting.
Ensemble of the musical, whatever. But I think that we bring a unique perspective. As my friend Sierra once said to me, she said, we had analog childhoods and digital adulthoods.
Yeah.
We had a different coming up that forced us to seek out knowledge, seek out information, seek out like-minded people. That's how we found the culture. That's how we found each other. And I think that kids are too separated in as much as they're technically connected. They're humanity, their common shared experience of each other. And then when they do come together, it's all managed by telling me all your little identifiers and making sure I remember that you're wearing a they them pin on your blouse. To me, it's like, let's get. And me as a creative artist, I want to be a mentor for I'm a humanist for sure. And I, I'm a student of Shakespeare and of a humanist kind of point of view that there are universal human experiences. And I think that we are in a position to mentor young people, and we just have to find a way to get them to get off the internet for a minute, to listen to our voices, to be willing to do the curiosity work that you're saying, the investigation of what it is that they're contemplating for their life, and know as much as they can know. Because we were starved. I mean, I was starved. When I got a copy of Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story, it was like, oh my God, there's somebody who knows the truth of my life. Like, how could this be? I feel like we're in a great position to do that, and I want to get more involved, and I rely on people like you to help lead me in those good directions. So I'll make sure that we share as many links and resources as you're willing to share with us, and let's do more of this. I love the work that you're doing with Dr. Ann Goldbauer, who let me talk his ear off on your shared podcast, Umbrella Hour, from the UK, and boy, was that was an early. I'm still learning, but I think I'm getting better at listening and doing a little less yammering as I yammer on. Zander Keig, keep up the good work. Keep advocating for knowledge and curiosity, and for pumping those brakes a little bit. I think that our kids are worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And, I forgot to say that it's not just the parents of children who I think should go and look at the different literature on both sides. I think anybody should do that. Anybody who's listening to this, who's trans and never knew that Sweden, Norway, Finland, Britain and France are starting to change course. Most people aren't hearing this because it's not being popularized in our social media and our mainstream media. So it's like, go look at those, read those reports, and know that that's what they're doing. And why are we doing something so different? Be curious about that. Be curious. And they've been doing it for longer than us. Why are they changing course now?
because they've got some data that we don't yet have.
They do have data that we have access to. That's what's on the internet too, right?
Okay, well, I am going to keep tapping into your stream of information and knowledge.
Absolutely.
And sharing it as much as I can here on the Cornfield. Zander Keig, thank you so much for your hard work and your dedication, your caring, and your vulnerability in sharing your own experience. And folks out there, stay curious and stay informed, stay in the stream of knowledge and in a place of discovery. And stay tuned, stay strong. Next time on the Cornfield. Bye-bye.